Hey everybody, today we are going to talk about body paragraphs, specifically body paragraphs for a research paper. So there's probably a lot of questions about what makes it different and what needs to go into a body paragraph. So let's jump right in. Here are three things that you need to focus on. The first is some sort of transition and topic sentence. This might be two sentences, it might be all one, but you need to have a transition and topic sentence. You need to have your evidence, and you need to have some sort of elaboration where you explain why that evidence matters or what it really means. So here's the first thing, your topic sentence. It should do two things. It should have some sort of transition to lead into it. Now this could be a standard transition, a word link, or an idea link, but there should be some way to lead into your new paragraph. Also, you should identify the focus of the paragraph right away in that first sentence or two. So here's my example down below. In italics is the end of a paragraph that might be before it. It says, that's why pay inequality in the workplace has to be addressed. So notice, I start my next paragraph off with a transition by saying, however. I also use a word link by talking about pay inequality. And I say, however, while pay inequality is the most talked about element of gender discrimination, one of the most harmful elements of gender discrimination is in the rate of promotions. This way, I clearly identify that the focus of this paragraph is going to be on the rate of promotions. The next piece you'll need is evidence. So your evidence should really include two things. Obviously your evidence, so I skip that. But it should include a smooth lead-in, some way to set up your evidence, and an in-text citation. That's the parentheses afterwards where you say, here's where I got my information from. So let's look at this example. For my lead-in, I said this, and if you go back to the previous slide, I'm talking about the rate of promotions. This was pointed out in a 2018 study that found that for every 100 men promoted to manager-level roles, only 79 women moved up into similar roles. All right, after that, you see my in-text citation. Notice, here's the important order, quotation mark, parentheses, citation, parentheses, period. Make sure that you are properly formatting that. So this is an example of how to use a lead-in, and you'll notice that first part was my lead-in, and then I have my citation after. After that, we have to talk about some elaboration strategies. So I want to give you some tricks that you can use to help elaborate on your evidence and explain how it's important, why it's important, help your reader understand it. The first thing you can do is tell the story behind the statistic. Here's what I mean. My statistic was about the number of men and women being promoted. This one, I say, this means that there are 21 women who are getting passed over and not being considered for jobs that they are equally as qualified for as the men who ended up getting them. I decided to take the story of the women getting passed over and talk about it a little bit more in this elaboration technique. So you could tell the story behind the statistic, or you could create context for the statistic. Here's what that can look like. While 21 women may not sound like much, when you multiply that to account for all the employees in the US, that means that there are thousands of women being overlooked every year. Sometimes it can be helpful to take a statistic and make it realistic for your reader, to make them understand how important that statistic really is, and the best way to do that is by adding context. Lastly, you could compare it with another statistic. Now you might say, but that means I'm adding more evidence. There's no rule against that, especially if it helps explain why your first piece of evidence is important. So here's what that might be. While we might say that it's getting better, in 1995, another study found that 10.6% of men had received promotions versus 7.6% of women, which means that this hasn't gotten any better in over 20 years. Notice that I cited this again. This helps to add some depth to the previous statistic. So these are three different strategies that you can use to elaborate on your evidence in a research paper. So let's put it all together and look at it. I've color-coded some pieces so you can see what they might look like. In yellow, we have our transition and our topic. In green, at first, we have our evidence. In blue is some elaboration. Green has more evidence, and blue has some elaboration and a conclusion. Now, does this have to be the structure of your paragraph? No. What it does have to have is all of the colors that are represented here. You need to have some sort of transition in topic, some sort of evidence, and some sort of piece of elaboration. How you shuffle that up is totally your call and your creative right, but make sure that you have those pieces in each paragraph and that your paragraphs are focused on one topic.